Have you ever wondered if almost everything you've been told about building muscle is far too slow? What if I told you that some people reportedly gained an amount of lean muscle in just weeks that most gym goers struggle to build in years? It sounds impossible. In fact, many experts would call it unrealistic. But what if there was a training method so intense, so unusual, and so effective in theory that it completely changed the way people thought about muscle growth? Today, we're diving deep into one of the fastest muscle building protocols ever discussed. Not just the fastest in terms of how quickly results appeared, but also one of the most efficient when it comes to the amount of exercise required. We're talking about a strategy designed to maximize muscle growth while minimizing time in the gym. And before you assume this means spending endless hours lifting weights every day, the truth is almost the opposite. The system we're exploring today focused on getting dramatic results with surprisingly short workouts, often lasting less than 40 minutes, only a few times per week. But before we go further, there's something important you need to understand. This is not necessarily the healthiest way to gain muscle. This is not a long-term wellness strategy. And it's certainly not what most doctors would recommend if your only goal is overall longevity and health. What we're discussing today is speed, rapid muscle gain, extreme results. And while some of the claims surrounding this method are controversial, the principles behind it are fascinating and surprisingly useful. Even if you never follow the exact protocol yourself, maybe you've always struggled to gain muscle no matter how much you eat or train. Maybe you're tired of slow progress and wondering if there's a smarter approach. Or maybe you simply want to understand what actually forces muscles to grow faster. Whatever brought you here, stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll understand not only the exact training concepts used in one of the most talked about muscle experiments ever, but also how to apply the science behind it to your own routine. The story begins in the 1970s with an experiment conducted at a university in Colorado. The goal was simple, but incredibly ambitious. Researchers wanted to create a minimalist training system capable of producing extraordinary muscle growth in a very short amount of time. And when we say minimalist, we truly mean minimalist. Participants trained only about 3 times per week, and sessions typically lasted less than 40 minutes. No marathon workouts, no spending half the day in the gym, just brief, highly focused sessions designed to trigger maximum adaptation. Then something happened that shocked almost everyone. One of the participants reportedly gained over 20 kilograms of body weight in about a month, while simultaneously losing a significant amount of body fat. The estimated increase in lean mass was nearly 29 kilograms. To put that into perspective, for most people, gaining even 1 kilogram of actual muscle tissue in a month would be considered an excellent result. That's the kind of progress many experienced athletes celebrate. So hearing numbers this extreme naturally raise eyebrows. And yes, before you ask, the obvious question came up immediately. Were anabolic steroids involved? According to the participant, no. He claimed he used no anabolic drugs and no supplements. Of course, there's no way to fully verify that claim, and the experiment received a lot of criticism from the scientific community. Skepticism is completely reasonable here, but even among people familiar with performance-enhancing substances, results of this magnitude are still considered extremely unusual. What made this even more interesting was what happened next. The specialist behind the training system reportedly looked at the results and thought something along the lines of, if this worked for someone else, I need to try it myself. Despite having less training experience and lower physical conditioning, and despite following the program for only about 3 weeks, he reportedly gained nearly 7 kilograms of lean mass. Again, if those numbers sound unbelievable, you're not alone. Most people would dismiss them instantly. But whether or not every result was perfectly accurate isn't actually the most important lesson here. What matters is understanding the principles that may have contributed to such rapid progress, because even if the outcomes were exaggerated, the training logic behind them teaches us something powerful about how muscle growth really works. To understand that, we first need to answer a critical question. What actually causes muscles to grow? Most people think muscle growth is simply about lifting weights until you feel exhausted, but your body doesn't work that way. Muscle growth follows biological rules, and once you understand those rules, everything changes. The first major ingredient is something called mechanical tension. Don't let the scientific name intimidate you. It's actually very simple. Mechanical tension happens when your muscles are forced to contract against resistance. In other words, when you challenge your muscles with weight, they experience tension. And the greater that tension, especially when controlled properly, the stronger the signal your body receives to adapt and grow. The second key factor is metabolic stress. You've probably felt this before without realizing it. It's that deep burning sensation in your muscles during a difficult set. That sensation comes from the accumulation of substances like lactate and other metabolic byproducts. Surprisingly, this stress doesn't just feel uncomfortable. It may actually contribute to muscle growth by creating an environment that signals adaptation. Then comes progressive overload, one of the most important concepts in all of fitness. Your muscles are incredibly smart. If you keep giving them the same challenge over and over again, eventually they stop responding. The body adapts. That's why growth eventually slows down if nothing changes. To continue building muscle, you have to gradually increase the challenge. That might mean more weight, more repetitions, more resistance, or even better control during each movement. But there's another concept that most people underestimate, and it may be one of the biggest reasons people stop seeing progress: intensity. Specifically, how close you train to muscular failure. In other words, how close are you to the point where your muscles physically cannot perform another repetition? And here's where things start getting really interesting, because the people behind this extreme muscle building experiment believed they had found a way to dramatically increase one specific type of muscular tension, a strategy so unusual that many bodybuilders later became obsessed with it. And once you understand how it works, you'll never look at your workouts the same way again. Before we reveal the method itself, there's one more principle you need to understand, because this idea sits at the center of everything that made this approach so unusual. Your muscles do not grow while you're training. They grow when you recover, during sleep, during rest, while you eat. During those quiet moments when your body shifts into repair mode and starts rebuilding tissue stronger than before, training is simply the signal. Recovery is where the transformation happens. And this matters because the people behind this protocol weren't trying to spend endless hours destroying their bodies in the gym. Their goal was something very different. They wanted to create the strongest possible growth signal in the shortest amount of time, then leave and allow the body to recover aggressively. Now, here's the idea that changed everything. Every exercise you perform has different phases, but most people never think about them. Let's imagine you're doing a bicep curl. First, there's the lifting phase, when you curl the weight upward and your muscle contracts. This is called the concentric phase. Then there's a brief moment at the top where the muscle stays tense without moving much. And finally, there's the lowering phase, when you slowly bring the weight back down. This is called the eccentric or negative phase. At first glance, this might seem like a minor detail, but physiologically, it changes everything. Researchers and coaches notice something fascinating. During the lowering phase of an exercise, your muscles are actually stronger than during the lifting phase. Think about it for a second. There are probably weights you struggle to lift, yet if someone helped you raise them into position, you could lower them slowly with control. Your body can handle significantly more resistance during the eccentric phase than during the concentric phase. And suddenly, a powerful question emerges. If muscle growth is driven heavily by mechanical tension, and mechanical tension increases when muscles handle heavier loads, then what happens if you train using weights that are actually heavier than what you can normally lift, but only focus on lowering them? That question became the foundation of one of the key strategies behind this experiment. Instead of performing normal repetitions for every movement, participants often focus heavily on negative repetitions. In some cases, machines were used to make this easier. In others, assistants helped participants raise the weight so they could concentrate only on lowering it in a controlled way. The theory was surprisingly simple. If someone normally trains at 70% of their maximum lifting ability, they receive a certain amount of muscular stimulus. But if they could safely expose their muscles to 120% of their normal capacity during the negative phase, where the muscle's stronger, maybe the growth signal would become dramatically larger. Now, let me be very clear. This concept remains debated. We do not have perfect scientific proof showing that eccentric overload alone magically creates extreme muscle growth. But what made people pay attention were the results reported by individuals who applied this style of training. The logic seemed difficult to ignore. Imagine forcing your muscles to adapt to resistance levels they rarely experience. The body suddenly receives a signal that says, we are not prepared for this level of demand. And when the body feels underprepared, adaptation becomes urgent. This may help explain why some athletes and bodybuilders became obsessed with emphasizing slow negatives during training. Even if they never fully adopted this protocol, they borrowed one important lesson from it. Lowering the weight slowly might be far more important than most people realize. In fact, there's something you can test immediately the next time you train. Stop rushing through your repetitions. Most people unknowingly sabotage their progress because they move too quickly, they swing weights using momentum, they bounce through exercises, they turn resistance training into a speed contest. But every time momentum takes over, tension on the muscle decreases. And remember, tension is a signal for growth. Instead of throwing the weight around, imagine controlling every second of the movement. Try taking 5 full seconds to lift the weight and another 5 seconds to lower it. Suddenly, the same exercise feels completely different. Your muscles work harder, the movement becomes more demanding, time under tension increases dramatically, and that matters more than many people realize. Because muscle growth isn't only about how much weight you move, it's also about how effectively you challenge the muscle while moving it. But negative repetitions weren't the only secret weapon used in this system. The second major strategy involved something called supersets. If you've never heard the term before, a superset simply means performing exercises back to back without rest between them. But the way they used supersets was very specific and surprisingly clever. Let's say your goal is to grow your legs. Instead of jumping straight into a big compound exercise like squats, the protocol might begin with an isolation movement that targets the muscle directly, such as leg extensions. Only after exhausting those muscles would participants move into a larger exercise like squats. At first, this sounds backward. Why tire out the muscle before the hardest movement? The answer lies in something called muscle fiber recruitment. Most people assume that when they train a muscle, every single muscle fiber activates equally. But that's not actually true. Different movements recruit different fibers to different degrees. And one of the hardest things in training is fully exhausting as much of a muscle as possible. By pre-fatiguing muscles with isolation exercises, the body becomes forced to recruit more muscle fibers during the larger compound movement that follows. Suddenly, more of the muscle is participating, more fibers are challenged, more adaptation may occur. But that wasn't the only benefit. Remember metabolic stress? That burning sensation we talked about earlier? Supersets dramatically increase it because you remove rest periods between exercises. Lactate accumulates faster. Fatigue builds. Muscles experience an intense environment that may further support growth signaling. In simple terms, the strategy attacked muscle growth from multiple angles at once. Mechanical tension through heavy resistance, metabolic stress through continuous effort, fiber recruitment through strategic exercise order, and intensity through training extremely close to failure. But there's something incredibly important I need to point out here, because this distinction changes everything. This method was designed primarily for muscle growth, not maximum strength. If your goal is becoming stronger in movements like squats, bench press, or deadlifts, many experts would recommend almost the opposite approach. You would usually start fresh with your biggest compound movements while energy is highest. But if your goal is hypertrophy, meaning muscle size, exhausting targeted muscles before larger exercises may create a completely different training effect. And here's the surprising part. Despite all the complexity we've discussed so far, the actual workouts themselves were almost ridiculously simple. In fact, when I show you the exact structure of the routine they used, you may actually wonder how something so basic could have produced results so dramatic. But before we get into the training itself, we need to answer the question everyone is probably asking right now. How exactly were these people eating? Because no matter how good your workout is, muscle simply cannot grow without resources. And the nutritional side of this protocol may surprise you even more than the training did. So what did the actual routine look like? You might expect some revolutionary system filled with complicated exercises, advanced techniques, or marathon training sessions that lasted for hours. But surprisingly, the opposite was true. The routine was incredibly simple, almost shockingly simple. In fact, many experienced gym goers would probably look at it and think, that can't possibly be enough. But that simplicity was intentional. The goal wasn't to spend endless time in the gym. The goal was to create an overwhelming muscle building signal in as little time as possible, then get out and recover. Most training sessions followed a full body structure and happened only 3 times per week. Sessions often lasted less than 40 minutes. Yes, less than 40 minutes. But don't mistake short for easy, because the intensity was where this protocol became truly demanding. The workout usually began with lower body training. Exercises like leg press, leg extensions, and squats were performed in sequence, often as supersets with little to no rest in between. And here's where things became especially interesting. Instead of adding endless volume, the system often relied on a single brutally hard set. One set. That sounds almost ridiculous in today's fitness culture, where people often perform set after set after set, convinced that more volume automatically means more muscle. But the philosophy here was very different. The creators believed that if a muscle was pushed hard enough, especially to true muscular failure, additional sets might not always provide meaningful extra benefit. In some cases, they believed excessive volume could actually interfere with recovery and reduce the body's ability to build muscle afterward. Think about that for a second. What if the biggest mistake many people make isn't training too little, but training too much? After lower body work, the routine moved into hamstrings and calves. For stubborn muscle groups like calves, extra attention was often encouraged because many people struggle to develop them. Then came upper body movements. Pullovers, rows, pull downs, and pulling exercises for the back were commonly included. Some variations use movements behind the head, which were popular at the time because they were believed to better isolate certain muscle fibers. Now, I need to pause here and say something important. Some of these exercise variations are controversial today because of injury risk, especially around the shoulders and neck. If a movement feels uncomfortable or unstable for your joints, there are absolutely safer alternatives that can provide similar benefits. The exact exercise matters less than the principle behind it. Remember, the key idea wasn't a magical movement. It was maximizing tension, effort, and muscle recruitment. After back work came shoulders, often including lateral raises, followed by pressing movements, then biceps, then triceps. Each muscle group was attacked briefly but intensely. And here's something crucial to understand. The workouts weren't designed around comfort. They were designed around failure, real failure, not the version of failure most people think they're reaching. Because let's be honest, most of us stop a set the moment it becomes uncomfortable, the moment the burning starts, the moment things get difficult. We convince ourselves we're done, when in reality, the muscle may still have more left to give. The creators of this protocol believe true growth happened near the edge during those final repetitions, where everything in your body wants to stop. When you think, I can't do another rep, and then somehow you squeeze out one more, or at the very least, you fight to control the weight on the way down. They often recommended training until you physically could not move the weight anymore with proper form. And even then, holding tension for a few extra seconds before lowering the weight slowly. Why? Because those final moments under tension may create some of the strongest growth signals for muscle adaptation. Another major focus was something called time under tension. Instead of racing through repetitions, Participants aim to keep muscles working continuously for long periods during each exercise, often targeting roughly 80 to 120 seconds of muscular tension. That's far longer than many people spend during a typical set. One strategy used to achieve this involved slowing everything down. Imagine taking 5 full seconds to lift the weight and another 5 full seconds to lower it. Suddenly, a set that normally lasts 20 seconds becomes deeply uncomfortable. Muscles begin shaking, fatigue builds rapidly, but at the same time, mechanical tension remains high throughout the movement. And remember, tension is one of the biggest drivers of growth. This is also why eccentric focused training became such a major part of the system. Since muscles are stronger during the lowering phase, emphasizing negatives allowed people to expose muscles to greater resistance than normal. Sometimes training partners even help lift the weight so the person could focus only on lowering it. And while this may sound extreme, there's actually a valuable lesson hidden here for anyone, regardless of experience level. You don't necessarily need more exercises. You don't necessarily need more hours. Sometimes you simply need better effort, better control, better focus, and more intention behind every repetition. Because a perfectly controlled set performed with true effort often beats a sloppy workout filled with distractions, momentum, and half-hearted reps. But there's another side of this protocol that people often overlook, and surprisingly, it may have been one of the biggest contributors to success: the environment. Many people who followed systems like this noticed something interesting. Training with partners dramatically improved results. Not because of motivation posters, not because of gym culture, but because having someone there helped push intensity to levels most people struggle to reach alone. Think about it. How often do you stop simply because your mind gives up before your muscles actually do? A good training partner changes that. Someone to spot heavy negatives. Someone to encourage one more rep. Someone who refuses to let you quit early. Because real muscular failure is uncomfortable. Extremely uncomfortable. And most people underestimate how hard true effort actually feels. But even after all this, there's still one missing piece we haven't fully explored. Because if muscle growth depends on tension, intensity, food, and recovery, could there be a way to push the process even further? A method to trick muscles into responding as if training had been even harder than it actually was? Surprisingly, some people believe there is. And it involves manipulating blood flow itself in a way that sounds almost too strange to work. Before we finish, there's one final concept that could potentially amplify muscle growth even further. And it's something most people have never seriously considered. What if you could convince your muscles that a workout was harder than it actually was? At first, that sounds impossible. After all, your body knows exactly how hard you trained, right? Not necessarily. One of the more fascinating strategies, sometimes combined with hypertrophy-focused training, involves something called blood flow restriction training. The concept sounds unusual, but the basic idea is surprisingly simple. By partially restricting blood leaving a muscle during exercise, metabolic byproducts like lactate begin accumulating more quickly. In other words, your muscles experience greater metabolic stress with less overall weight and sometimes less overall effort. Think back to what we discussed earlier. Muscle growth appears to be influenced by multiple factors working together. Mechanical tension from heavy resistance, metabolic stress from the accumulation of fatigue-related substances, progressive overload that forces adaptation, intensity that pushes muscles close to failure, and finally, proper recovery that allows growth to actually happen. This training method focused heavily on mechanical tension. That was the centerpiece. Heavy resistance, slow negatives, long periods of muscular tension. But adding metabolic stress into the equation through strategic techniques may theoretically create an even stronger growth signal. The logic is fascinating. When blood flow leaving the muscle slows down, compounds that normally clear out during exercise remain trapped longer, lactate builds, fatigue rises faster. The muscle begins interpreting the workout as harder than it may objectively be. In a sense, you're creating an amplified signal for adaptation. Now, this doesn't mean everyone should immediately run out and experiment with blood flow restriction, techniques like this require caution, especially if someone has circulation problems, cardiovascular issues, or underlying medical conditions. But the broader lesson is incredibly important. Muscle growth is not always about doing more. Sometimes it's about doing things more intelligently, creating stronger signals with less wasted effort, using strategy instead of simply adding hours to your workouts. And after everything we've explored today, there's one truth I want you to remember. This entire protocol was never really about magic. It wasn't about some secret exercise hidden from the fitness world. It wasn't about a mysterious shortcut. It was about understanding the rules your body already follows and pushing those rules to an extreme. High mechanical tension, training close to real muscular failure, controlled movements instead of momentum, enough calories to support repair, aggressive protein intake, serious recovery.